Okay, we're about to go live. I'm gonna let you know when it starts, Sarah.
Okay, and then, and I think
And
that
we're live.
yeah,
Great.
I can't.
Hi, this is Sarah. I'm going to introduce Abiola Heyliger, who's the Independent Living Specialist for Montgomery County, works for Independence Now. She's going to do a presentation in just a minute on independent living services and CILS, Centers for Independent Living.
And hi, Sarah. Thank you so much for having me. Thank you to all the participants who are joining for the 2020 Youth Leadership Forum. Yay! I'm going to share my screen if you just bear with me for just a two seconds. And my screen is there. And share. Okay. And this is the first time I've done this, so please forgive me. All right, so I am going to start with this first slide. You should already know Independence Now's main mission. We advocate for and we embody and encourage independence and equality for all persons with disabilities. And you probably have met a good number of the independent living services staff. That is Shannon Minnick, who is our Director for Independent Living Services, myself, the Independent Living Specialist for Montgomery County. Rochelle Howard serves as the same and Independent Living Specialist for Prince George's County. You already know Damon. Damon is our Youth Leadership Forum Coordinator. Kelvin Hawkins, who is our Youth Specialist. So if any of you would become consumers with Independence Now before you hit 30, then you would be working directly with Kelvin. And then we have Deborah Potts, who's our housing specialist. And I just went over the Independence Now's mission, but I want to tell you a little bit about the history of independent living. Independence Now itself is actually part of a national network of centers for independent living. And there are centers for independent living across the United States in every state, representing various counties. Independence Now, the Center for Independent Living that represents Montgomery County and Prince George's County, we are at your service for those who are residents of these counties. But the father of the Center of the Independent Living Movement is a man named Ed Roberts. Mr. Roberts was a young person, just like yourselves, who had contracted polio, and when he was ready to go to school, to college, he went to University of California, Berkeley. And he was disappointed to find that it was not the classrooms, the studies were not as accessible as they needed to be, and he needed it to be. And so he started his own group, which was called the Center for Independent Living, on the campus at UC Berkeley. And that was where the very first Center for Independent Living was born, in California. I think you guys saw Crip Camp a couple of nights ago, and you may have seen a couple of glimpses of that Center for Independent Living, and that's how far back it dates. I guess 1960s. And here are some images. I probably should do it like this. Some images from the disability rights movement, which is very much a part of the civil rights history. Many people are familiar with the civil rights marches, and obviously people are in the streets right now as we speak, protesting against racial injustice, and certainly anti-racism training is taking place. But what's very important to know is that racism or discrimination on the basis of racism, sex, gender, and certainly disabilities are all civil rights. They're all, it is unconstitutional to discriminate against anyone for any of those things. So it's relevant to talk about that because it's a discussion that we put right in the center with the discussion with disability rights, because it's a civil right. And unfortunately, some persons with disabilities that we have seen victims of police violence are persons with disabilities who are also Black. And so we'll talk about that, and I welcome discussion a bit later. I think I through all of that already. Okay, so I just mentioned disability rights are civil rights. And so talking a little bit about what is a disability. one of the things that I love the most about Independence Now is the fact that the majority of our staff, probably maybe all but one person, is a person with a disability, whether you can see them or not, including myself. And but the disabilities can include disabilities related to the way that you learn, the way that you process information, think. Certainly they can be physical. And I think that the symbol that we often see about disabilities, the person in a wheelchair, that suggests that, you know, the person, that someone who's using a wheelchair, that person is definitively only has a physical disability, but disabilities can include all kinds of things. And the chart that I'm showing here shows that only, I would say that 5% of persons with disabilities are actually wheelchair users, whereas 30% could have a disability that impacts their hearing, and others could be impact how you think or your knowledge, and then 43% include all kinds of other disabilities, which include, like myself, lupus or Lyme disease or other sorts of things that you just don't see, right? So tell me if I'm moving too fast. So one of the things that we are very large proponents of at Independence Now is self-advocacy. And I think with this Youth Leadership Forum, you've been talking a lot about that, but also system advocacy, which we'll get to a little bit later. But the self-advocacy part is really about knowing who you are first, then knowing your own responsibilities, as well as knowing your rights and how to speak up for yourself, how to speak up for your rights when that's needed. Some of the things that you might speak up for as a young person would include accommodations, whether at school or at work or at home. And so you have rights under the law, and we'll get to that as well, to ask for accommodations. So self-advocacy, accommodations, and the law, we want to talk about that just a little bit because that's my favorite topic. All right, so first, what is self-advocacy? It's speaking up for yourself. And what can an advocate help you do when you allow or you ask someone to advocate on your behalf? It's where you help, you tell people how you feel about things and what you want, and then you direct that person to advocate for you. But again, it comes down to understanding what your rights are, and that person who's you appointed as your advocate should understand what your rights are, but also that advocate can help support you in meetings with your teachers, with your professors, with your employer, with even your doctor. And maybe this particular advocate is someone who's a counselor or a social worker, and maybe meeting with you with your family. But that advocate can also just make sure that you understand the most important information that's relevant to you. So how are you a good advocate? How can you be the best advocate for yourself and or a good advocate for someone else? That is someone who supports you in making the right decisions for yourself. It's someone who listens to you, someone who respects you, but someone who also makes sure that you're included in all of the decision making. And then now we want to talk about communication, because there are lots of ways to communicate. And a good advocate is going to make sure that the way that they're communicating, or the way that you all communicate with each other, to be able to get accommodations or any other thing that you need, is the understanding how the person talks or how someone talks, or making eye contact, but also listening. You can't really be a good advocate for someone else if you're able to listen to what the person is really trying to communicate to you in terms of their needs. And no one can be a good advocate for you if they're not listening to you and really trying to gauge what it is that are your actual goals. And who can help you find a good advocate if you need one? A social worker, Independence Now staff, Doors staff, a friend, or a family member. Okay, and next. Oops. Okay, so what is a good way to speak up for yourself? One of the best ways, just speak up. Literally, open your mouth, talk, raise your hand. There are lots of ways to communicate. In writing is often the best way, but there are multiple ways. It could be, getting the attention of a professor or a teacher, maybe at the side of a classroom. It could be writing a letter. It could be making a phone call. It could be sending an email, but there are lots of different ways to speak up for yourself. And another ways that you can advocate for yourself could be in a group, and there are lots of reasons why that's important. We'll get to that. A bad advocate is going to be someone who doesn't listen to you. And now I want to circle back because we started talking about law and we started talking about your rights. And all of these points about advocacy all circle back to that point. When you're advocating or speaking up for yourself, it's speaking up from a basis of your knowledge of your rights, your knowledge of the law, your knowledge of what is due to you under the law. And so a bad advocate then will be someone who doesn't understand your rights, someone who's not listening to you, and someone who is not looking out for your best interest and working to help you accomplish what it is that you need. Okay, so again, I'm just driving home the point that you have to know your rights and you must know your responsibilities as well. Okay, you may have already gotten a chance to talk about the types of accommodations that you might need. In terms of policy and law, there are provisions within the law that allows for your professors, your teachers at school, but also your representatives in Congress. They have helped to draft regulations that allow you to request certain types of accommodations in all kinds of settings. You in your presentations, or how you respond, how you interact, the setting, the timing, scheduling, your skill sets, all kinds of things. I'm going to skip to the next slide. Okay, right. Some of the things that you might already be familiar with are accommodations at school, and that could include your IEP. And so your IEP should outline what kinds of things that you need in the classroom to enable your success. Okay, and then go to the next. Okay, all right. And now among the accommodations, there could be modifications that you'd be talking about. Modifications are changes to maybe the physical environment or the physical equipment that you might be working with in order to be able to do what you need to do. But we'll get to that a little bit later. Now we get back to the point of your rights. I have to move this out of the way because I can't see that. Okay, so we talked a little bit about the Independent Education Plan, your IEP. I also want to touch on Section 504, the Rehabilitation Act of 1973, and of course, the Americans with Disability Act, the ADA. I'm sure that you have heard of the ADA, but you may not be as familiar with Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act of 1973. You've been utilizing it, but you may not be as familiar with it. I think for those of you that are and have gone through high school or middle school, then you may be more familiar with the IEP. Okay, so the IEP is the Individualized Education Program, and excuse me, let me skip, I didn't want to skip that. So that is where you can develop with either your parents as well as with your teachers or your principal or your guidance counselors on the certain specific accommodations that you've spoken up about, or your family or a personal advocate has spoken up about, to be able to help to accommodate you in the classroom. Okay. Now, Section 504, understanding your rights under this Section 504, that is outlines a series of the ways that you can be accommodated in the classroom, and in some cases, when you go to work, especially as a working student. Okay, and Section 504, it protects students with a physical or mental condition that seriously limits any major life activity. It also entitles students with disabilities to receive a free, F-R-E-E, and appropriate public education. Free. By the way, I'd like to take a moment to remind you all, for students going to community colleges. My understanding is that across the state of Maryland, not just Montgomery County and Prince George's County, that one of the ways that you can take advantage of this, you can get a free tuition at your local community college. So if one of the goals that you've set for yourself is to advocate yourself in terms of your education, you can take advantage of that particular provision within the law that allows you to get your education at a local community college. Okay, so going back to Section 504, access is the law. Any school that is receiving federal funding must take reasonable steps to prevent harassment. They must provide reasonable accommodations to ensure your equal access and opportunity. And they cannot, and I repeat, cannot stop you from participating in programs or activities based only on your disability. Okay, there are four major categories of access to accommodations that are available to you with or persons or students with disabilities under Section 504. For one, it could be where the syllabus or the curriculum isn't in an accessible form. For example, if you are visually impaired, then maybe the syllabus has to be presented to you in Braille. There may be programs, for example, that you cannot be discriminated against. So if a program, for example, an example of a program could be the school's basketball program, or maybe a play that they're putting on. You cannot be prevented from participating in that because of your disabilities. Certainly buildings and facilities. There in Annapolis, Anne Arundel, where you all are located right now, then what I can remember is that all of the buildings, as you enter, they have those auto push buttons. That's thanks to the ADA, but certainly even in a school setting, the buildings, all the facilities must be accessible for persons with disabilities. And that brings us to category number 4, activities. All of these things are things that you can advocate for if you need them, but you first have to be able to speak up now that you know what your rights are. But your responsibility will be to speak up, to self-advocate in order to ensure that you're able to get the maximum benefit or maximum access that suits you for any syllabus, program, buildings, or activities that you're interested in. Okay, next. All right, and then the Americans with Disabilities Act, ADA. That is, we want to understand your rights under that and how they apply to post-secondary education. Some of you are on the verge of where you're preparing to leave your parents' nest, or maybe you're thinking about college or going to a vocational program, and your responsibilities can change when you go to college. Again, knowing your rights, knowing your responsibilities. When you are ready to start college, before you go, you may want to find out if there is a disability services coordinator or a counselor that you can meet with, and you can again speak up, meet with them, ask about or make inquiries about the accommodations that you might need in the classroom. One example of that for myself is that at one point I had difficulty working with my fingers because they would seize up. So one of the accommodations that I requested before classes started was to get a voice recorder so that I could record all of the professor's lectures so that I could play them back and could just keep playing them over and over again until because I couldn't take notes in the classroom at that time. And that's just an example. But it was my responsibility to first ask if that was okay. And then the school or the professors approved that. And I, from then on, was able to record all of my classes and then play them back in order to review my notes. Again, that's just an example. All right, so we talked about the 4 areas of Section 504. I wanted to play a game, but I don't know if we have that kind of time. Maybe Shannon or Sarah, you could tell me how much time we have. I can't hear anybody.
I don't know if Shannon's gonna.
Don't have enough time.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think
How much?
make sure they hear about Centers for Independent Living and how to access independent living services. So maybe you want to do that for the last few minutes.
Okay.
We're ready to go
right.
eat dinner because we have painting at 6.
Okay. Well, I will do that. And then one other thing too is there are 7, I believe 7 centers for independent living across the state of Maryland. And I can send that in the chat box, the listing of what is your county's Center for Independent Living. But Centers for Independent Living do the same that Independence Now staff or Independence Now does, and that is to support your rights as a person with disabilities, to help to advocate for you, serve as your advocate if you need it, whether it's independent to enable and empower you in your independent living goals or your independent studying goals or independent working goals. And as I said, there's a Center for Independent Living near you that serves you and your county. And then the last thing I'd like to say, I want to bring it back.
Let me share this screen, Abiola.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
Take your stuff down.
Oh, okay.
Then you can keep talking. I'm just going to put up a different slide.
All right. And so while Sarah is pulling that up, I just wanted to say one other point about rights, coming back to civil rights, because right now we're dealing with a very, very unique time, but I felt that it's more important to communicate to you, the young people, and particularly young people with disabilities, that this is your time. In my heart, and this is just me speaking, not necessarily Independence Now, that this is the time that you can seize to advocate for the civil rights. As you know, the great Martin Luther King Jr. said that injustice anywhere is injustice everywhere. And so I hope that you don't hesitate to consider that this movement is about you, but it's going to be led and driven by younger folks. And, I would have to say that if you know or you see that and you feel strong enough to be an advocate for someone else or to advocate for the rights of others, you are encouraged. You have the support of the disability community behind you. So Sarah got up on her screen.
Thank you so much, Abiola.
You're very welcome.
That was a great presentation. But we do want to let you guys know that there are 7 centers for independent living in the state of Maryland. And you can contact yours by this link that I've put in the chat box. You want to make sure you contact and connect with your Center for Independent Living, because they're the people that are going to support you through your transition from high school to the real world.
So who knows where they are on this map?
We're in Independence Now.
Oh, well, there you go. That's a good one. I heard they're good. Maybe the best, actually.
This is being recorded, Sarah.
Oh, sorry. I mean, one of 7 excellent centers for independent living in Maryland. I hope my mom's watching. Who else? Somebody must live somewhere.
Independence Now is actually located in Prince George's and Montgomery County. So that means we only serve Prince George's and Montgomery County. But if you look on the outskirts of us, you see that there's 6 others.
Where does somebody else live? Not everybody lives in Montgomery and Prince George's.
There's Freedom Center. I live in Frederick County.
Okay, Frederick County, that's the Freedom Center, the good folks at the Freedom Center.
I'm at St. Mary's.
Person. You live where?
St. Mary's.
St. Mary's, Southern Maryland still was just on the phone with
I live in Dearwood, Maryland.
And Southern Maryland still does a lot of good independent living skills training for youth. Sorry.
I live in Dearwood, Maryland.
Durwood, that's Montgomery County, isn't it?
Yeah, that's us.
Montgomery County.
Way up there. What? Wait, I'm sorry. Howard County is ARI. See in the middle here, the green, Accessible Resources for Independence. My work wife runs that center. And they do lots
The
of
second best center.
training.
The second best center.
Oh, no, I
I'll
can't.
let you have this win.
Someone else said that, Sarah, not you.
We're all I love all my children the same.
And you guys, like I said, if you copy this this link right over here in the chat box, if you copy that and click on that, it'll take you to all of the seals in the state of Maryland, and you can see. And please just reach out to them.
Nobody from Baltimore? There's got to be folks from Baltimore.
There has to be somebody from
Several kids.
Baltimore.
Yeah, Baltimore is the Image Center. They're located in Towson, and they run a lot of youth programs. Jessica does up there. So look them up, or ask Shannon or Damon to make sure you get connected to your local Center for Independent Living.